to address different needs in the community. So I like that part of it. The one thing that I get caught up on is I work with clients who have Parks and Rec departments that are generating $2 or $3 million plus revenue for their municipality. So we talk about running government like a business a lot, but a Parks and Rec department is really the one department in a city that you can truly and absolutely run like a business. Right now, all the plus side revenue that comes from the Parks and Rec department goes back into the general fund budget. So while these big improvements, we're not going to be able to fund off the revenue that the Parks and Rec department generates in itself. So I support the sales tax staying flat where it's at right now to do these enhancements. But moving forward, I'd really like to see that budget separated out. And a portion of every time someone participates in activity, part of that fee goes back into a maintenance budget that's separate from the general fund budget. So that way the Parks and Rec director has the power based on how efficient he runs his department and how much revenue he generates to be able to use that money to make improvements without having to raise taxes again. Right now, that process is a lot more convoluted because their budget is tied in with the main city budget. That's how a lot of my clients across the country do it, and they've seen a lot of positive success from it. So I would like to explore that idea a little bit more here. But as someone who participates in a lot of Parks and Rec activities that the city puts on, I definitely would look forward to some improvements, but I'm always concerned about regressive taxes, especially sales tax. Whether it costs the citizen $60 or $70, that could be a week's worth of food. And I already told you I'm concerned about the people being priced out of living here. So it's definitely something that's going to be thoroughly reviewed.
Yes, this is a hot item right now, and I'm glad we're discussing it. This is going to be on the ballot in November, so I'm hoping everybody gets educated about it. Now, what I know about this is there's been a lot of community input for Parks and Rec, and what we've constantly realized is the community needs more Parks and Rec areas, especially indoor space. So what this provides, like Jared was saying, is a partnership between the school district and the city. So we're looking at Eisenhower Middle School and Susan B. Anthony Middle School to extend their gyms a little bit more. So the city doesn't need to purchase any type of property. So we're expanding it. Who are the benefiters? The entire community. Because it's going to be attached to the schools, there's many demographics that wanted indoor space for walking, for gymnastics, for wrestling, whatever it might be. This will provide that. It also provides it for the community. It's not about always competitive play. That's one revenue source, but the community can now utilize these things. The other thing that's going to come from this initiative is a Seco Park, 12 tennis courts, and our ball fields are going to be jazzed up a little bit so they're more playable, because sometimes when it rains you can't play and then those games get put off. And we're just talking about regular tournaments. So if we want that to be sustainable and we want it to be playable, that's what we're looking at, is improving those ball fields so people that come into Manhattan can have their tournaments and we can have our leagues playing. The other factor to this is the health, mental wellness, and emotional stability that comes from being outside, being active, playing. When you think about obesity and everything else that's coming our way, this is one of the solutions that we can invest in. We may not reap the rewards right away, but give it about a few years and you will definitely reap the rewards, not just in money or revenue, but in health benefits. And I think that's a long-range plan we need to look at closer and keep track of.
I need to let you folks know that I'm on the Parks and Recreation Board here in Manhattan. I failed to mention that in my introduction. I do have to be a little cautious in my remarks. Education is something we can do. I think Usha's done a good job of that, but I just can't speak beyond that. But I do want to make a few comments being on the Parks and Recreation Board and tie it to other issues that are important to me. Usha mentioned the health and well-being. That certainly ties into the quality of life that we want to sustain. But there's other issues too, and we may get into those later in the evening, but when it comes to big issues that Manhattan has, including retaining employee base that can help the community grow at a proper level, we need Parks and Recreation to be adequate and strong to attract and help retain folks who are in a certain younger demographics that we want to retain here in Manhattan. So Parks and Recreation are very important, not just from a health standpoint, from a body standpoint, but I believe it's important from a business standpoint here in this community. And I'm definitely a supporter of quality parks here in the community.
Okay, it's a three-part question. Is it good for the region? You know, yes, I think as Brian said, you know, a lot of the businesses come in, they look at that when they're attracting employees, so we need to keep a good Parks and Rec program out there. Should it be funded by sales tax? We discussed that at the commission, and of course the option was property tax, sales tax. My thought on that was sales tax is a better option, because there's many people that don't live in the city limits, and they use our Parks and Recs, whether it's a swimming pool or whatever. And so we should spread the wealth. We're trying to cause the city to be a place for you to go shopping. It's the economic draw to come in, and so why not use the tax base, sales tax base? That will generate a lot more funds than heaping more mill levy on the property tax owners. I also think it was a good idea to put it on the ballot without the city commission making the decision, because as the state said with their tax lid, if you're going to build big projects, the voters should get to vote on it. And so that's the option. The voters will decide, not 5 city commissioners. And that way everybody will have their voice in it. The one troubling aspect may be the operational maintenance cost of it, because all of the data that we put together on building this facility really doesn't address that, because it's sort of up there in the air. Now, part of that is because this is going to be a partnership with the schools. And by doing that, it'll benefit the school district and it'll benefit the city. And some of those costs are going to be shared between the two. When you think about custodians and things of that nature. So the USD is going to get a big benefit out of it. But the last thing is also by putting on the sales tax, it was agreed at the commission, and that's something that's going to be followed through on, that this is going to be incrementally built, which means we're not going to go out and bond this thing and build them tomorrow. They're going to be built over a period of years as the money comes in, and that's going to save you $16 million in interest and will have an impact on that $274 million city debt.
And Jared? Okay, the next most popular question that came in tonight was all related to basically specifically city debt, city spending. And so the question for you, Jared, is how can we as a city work together collectively to prioritize, manage, and work down the city of Manhattan's $270 million plus debt and its increasing property tax?
Yeah. So a few things on this. First is just in general, property taxes, and how much they've increased really here over the last decade. Again, is one of the reasons why I'm running. I actually have an example of someone who I work with who works at Civic Plus, but because property taxes were, after looking at the house value, after property taxes and the special taxes that were on the home, they couldn't afford it anymore. So the home was in their price range, but after you tacked on those specials and those taxes, they couldn't afford it anymore. So they actually moved to Chapman, and they commute to Manhattan every day. I see that repeatedly all the time. So I absolutely know that these are issues. I think there's a few things that my experience can help us to solve this problem. First, our biggest expenditure in the city budget is personnel, operations of the day-to-day of running the city of Manhattan. I have a very high knowledge of the internal workings of local government. And you would probably be blown away by the immense amount of money that any municipality, any city in the country spends on software alone. The first thing I'd want to do is go in and evaluate all of our contracts, make sure that we're actually using those contracts to their fullest extent, and making sure that city staff are bought into the processes that these softwares help to make more efficient. If we can bring down the operating costs of the city overall, that will have a tremendous impact on the overall budget of the city and prevent us from having to bring on debt in order to fund different expansions. Specials make up a huge portion of our debt. That's one thing that I think that's left out of the conversation a lot. I think that there's an ongoing conversation on whether specials are the best direction to continue to go. I have a few opinions on that as well, so hopefully we'll be able to address that later in the conversation.
So we do have what seems like a very high debt, and several areas of the debt have dedicated funding revenue sources for that. And the ones that don't, sometimes we have to depend on property taxes, but the property taxes are a very small part of it. Our major source of revenue is our sales tax revenue. And I think if we invest more in Sales tax in the sense having more events, having more attractions, that's one way to build on our sales tax. One thing that comes from property taxes is, as we get more businesses coming in, they also back are on the tax rolls, so we collect revenue from those sources as well. And the other thing is, even though our debt is going high, we are growing and investing continuously back into our community. The debt is, as it comes down a little bit, there's always another investment being made. So as far as the looming number of $274 million, I think most of it, the city is $147 million. That's what we run our general fund on. The rest of it has a dedicated revenue source that takes away from the debt that's in that number. But the $147 million that we do accrue each month, most of it's for our RCPD, we have our Parks and Rec, and all of those are collecting their own revenue sources. I think the emphasis is constantly put on the property tax component of it, but the revenue has to come from sales tax revenue, and that comes from investing back into our community, and I think that's the long-range plan we're trying to follow as far as working with Riley County, Potawatomi County, Erie County, and we see the expansion going into Potawatomi County, but with NBAF coming in and the jobs that it's already created, they have 300 construction workers already, and by 2020, I believe, we'll have up to 300 employees already on base. And that's going to bring in more revenue, and that's the progress we want to see and continue to move forward with.
As a CEO business person, I deal with things such as debt servicing, and how to do that all the time. What I see are two basic principles here that aren't complicated. Either you increase the ability to bring in new tax revenue, or you cut expenses. There has to be a balanced approach to that, and I have learned that over my 38 years. You have to look at all the factors involved that I will share with you. One of my common principles, and what I want to be a catalyst to help happen here, is the growth of jobs. Usha mentioned that we need business, and I agree with her. We have to be strategic on the businesses that we look at bringing in, the quality of jobs that they represent, and make sure that we have a workforce here in this community that's ready to fulfill those jobs. I do that every day. On the level as a CEO, I manage those budgets. I understand what it takes to create efficiencies. That's my job. I do that every day, and you have to gain that too to lower expenses. But I think a key factor for us in being successful in addressing the debt concerns here in Manhattan is to bring in new business, strategically address business that's going to help bring in those tax dollars that this community needs. To me, this is one of the main core issues that if we don't solve and do it as quickly as possible, the other issues that this community has are going to be more difficult to address over the long haul. And the tax burden on our citizens, you in this audience, are going to continue to probably be pretty heavy.
Okay, city debt's always been one of my favorite topics. When I first got elected, that was the idea. And one of the things that I worked hard on was the economic development tax. We ended up taking a third of that, which was $10 million for debt relief. And that's been put against it since that tax has been in place. But the problem we have at the commission is, while we had 10 million to drive the debt down, we had to add 11. That's the problem. So step one is just stop taking all these bonds out so that we can make some progress on debt relief. If we hadn't had that 10 million on that economic development tax, your mill levy would be 9 higher, if you look at the charts. So that made a significant impact on it, and that's probably why it's not at 300 million. So I'm quite pleased with the results of that. One of the things that troubles me though still is, look at our convention center. It has 11 years of debt at $500,000 interest for the next 11 years. This city budget went up 0.35 because of that conference center, which was an economic development initiative. And what happened was we had to raise the bed tax, and we took some of the economic development fund, but $166,000 of that went on your property tax. To me, that's ridiculous. That all should have gone on economic development because that's what bought it. And that's the problem when we talk economic development. If it doesn't do economic development for the homeowners in the city, I've got a problem with it. Now, long term, how do we address this? Well, that tax is going to run out in 4 years, and the discussion is going to be to renew it. One of the things we have to look at is perhaps renewing it and then configuring it so that it still addresses debt reduction and addresses infrastructure, which it does now, and then the rest on the responsible growth portion. But when we renew it, it needs to be renewed citywide and not be tied to Riley County for the simple reason that where is Walmart? Where is Menards? Not in Riley County, and we're not getting any money out of that on economic development. So we've got to renew it, but we've got to capture that part of it. And you may ask, why are they there? Maybe because the taxes are lower.
So in order to bring the debt down, you have to do two things. One, you have to invest in your parks and recreation. Why? Because you have to make Manhattan a place that people want to visit. Then you have to bring the property taxes down because you have to make Manhattan a place that people want to live. If taxes went up and the debt went down, I would say, okay, it sucks that I have to pay more, but that's fine. If taxes went down and debt went up, I would say, I understand. But year after year, taxes goes up, and then the debt goes up. That means somebody is mismanaging your money, not theirs, your money. So what do we have to do?